Circle of Hope Network, doing life and being church together.
Okay, my background is church history and taught world religions for a number of years. My D-Min I usually don't put on my Adventist resume because it's in ecumenism. And I had a couple of classes in Franciscan history at a Franciscan seminary. I was in grad school. So I hate to disappoint you that Francis did not actually say, preach the gospel, if necessary, use words.
That's why I said...
But he said something very similar. And this is when he's sending his first brothers as missionaries to the Middle East. And they're going to Syria, they're going to Egypt, North Africa, all of these places. And he said, the Lord says, behold, I'm sending you as lambs in the midst of wolves. Therefore be prudent as serpents and simple as doves, Jesus said. Therefore, any brother who by divine inspiration desires to go among the Saracens, the Muslims, and other non-believers should go with the permission of his minister and servant. And as for the brothers who go, they can live spiritually among the Saracens in two ways. One way is not to engage in arguments or disputes, to be subject to every human creature for God's sake, and to acknowledge that they're Christians. Another way is to proclaim the Word of God when they see it pleases the Lord, so that they believe in the all-powerful God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So the one way is the ministry of life. That's what he did when he went to Egypt, and he was taken before Sultan Malik al-Kamil, and they had a great conversation. And the Sultan said afterwards, you know, if every Christian was like you, we wouldn't be at war. And there's a great movie that was made called The Sultan and the Saint, using those stories as an example for interfaith dialogue. But he says those that see that they have to go out in the street corner and preach can do so. And well, some of his brothers did that. They went to Morocco and went to the main mosque in the center of town. Or no, it wasn't even Morocco, it was Sevilla. So they went to, they go to Spain, which is Muslim, start preaching Jesus during Friday prayers. And they were taken to Morocco and were the first Franciscan martyrs for that reason. That's why he said this. You don't have to do it that way. But I'm here playing off of David's comments this morning about that martyrdom, that call to death, that call to die to self and the be willingness to sacrifice. And these are some U.S. Army chaplains who did that. That's where some of our chaplaincies in the military, police, and fire departments carry risks that are inherent with the job. World War II. A rabbi, a Catholic priest, and two Protestant ministers on the U.S. troop ship Dorchester going to Europe. Ship was hit by a torpedo from a German submarine. They went down and they gave their life jackets, they gave their gloves, they gave everything they had to save the lives of the soldiers on that ship and went down with it. Emil Capon, Catholic priest from Kansas, captured by the Chinese during the Korean War, taken to China as a prisoner of war, gave his food to other prisoners, stole food from the guards to give it to prisoners, prayed when they told him to shut up. In the indoctrination sessions, he would stand up and preach Jesus and argue philosophically with them, and just showed such resilience. Finally, they had to put him in solitary and starve him to death, because once he came and ministered to the prisoners after their torture sessions, they bounced back. And they saw, how do you destroy the resilience of prisoners? Kill their chaplains. So they told us in chaplain school, for me in the 80s, remember the lesson of the Korean War, that not a single chaplain who was taken prisoner lived. Vincent Capodanno was a Catholic priest in Vietnam. Charles Waters, another chaplain in Vietnam. Tim Baycock was one of my classmates in the Army chaplain school, the one chaplain killed in Operation Iraqi Freedom. Canadian military too, Father Roser Crochetier in World War I with the Vendeuse Artillery Regiment. I trained with them at Gagetown. Albert McCreary, Baptist chaplain, the last Canadian chaplain killed in World War II. Michael Judge, the first person who died on 9/11. Catholic priest who was a chaplain to the fire department. He went in there, and they carried him out in this picture that became known as the American Pietà. You know, like this image of Mary cradling the body of Jesus. Just some examples of what it means to go with the people you have responsible for. What does it mean to give yourself over and fully? Those are the examples that we study in the military chaplaincy. To be encouraged by as well as to remember. You know, yeah, we have fun with our soldiers, but this could happen to us too. Because we don't minister from the safety of the rear. Our job is to go as far forward as possible. Now, a little bit, I'd put some slides together on the Canadian military chaplaincy, but I reached out to one of my friends who's one of the senior chaplains in the Canadian military. He said, do you have anything? He says, well, I didn't, but he says, I went ahead and put together something for you. So this is what he put together. You notice the sign, the insignia today no longer says in hoc signo vinces in this sign conquer, but vocatio ad servitium, called to serve. Canadian chaplaincy is headed by a chaplain general. He's a major general, 2 stars or 2 maple leafs. He's over all the chaplains of the Royal Canadian Chaplain Service, whether they're Army, Air Force, or Navy, whether they're Catholic or Protestant, one chaplain general. We don't get to wear clerical collars with our uniforms, but following the British tradition, Canadians do. And he's over all the faiths as well. So Anglican up top, and Suli is a Muslim chaplain, good buddy of mine, rabbi down below. And this is an interesting thing that the Canadian military does, from the British tradition, you make an altar of the drums, and that's for the blessing of the colors of the regiment, the flag. Chaplain General is also the personal chaplain to Her Majesty the Queen when she comes to visit. And as a Canadian chaplain, you don't join one branch like we do. You join the Royal Canadian Chaplain Service and then get assigned. And you may wear the Air Force uniform, you may wear the Army uniform, may wear the Navy uniform, or you might be wearing an Army uniform serving on a Navy ship like one of my friends is right now. And different opportunities. There's the Reg Force. Those are the active duty chaplains. Those are the ones that are going to be deployed to combat. There's the Reserve Force, 123 units in 117 cities across the country. Also a smaller Navy Reserve and Air Reserve. There's the cadet organizations, and both Reserve and Reserve chaplains are assigned as chaplains for the cadet summer camp. So Daniel Saw has done that work. They contribute. What's that?
My son is a cadet.
Oh, he is. Yeah. They contribute to the operational effectiveness of the Canadian Armed Forces by supporting the moral and spiritual well-being of personnel and their families in all aspects of their lives. They minister to the needs of all members of the Canadian Armed Forces and their families, whether they attend church or are of the same religion, or if they have any spiritual beliefs at all. Like the U.S. chaplains, Canadian chaplains have two bosses. You're accountable to both your church and to the military. So in the U.S., they're accountable to us as the endorser. So a chaplain has to balance those two roles. As faith group leaders, chaplains come under the ecclesiastical jurisdiction of their denomination and faith groups as commissioned officers subject to their particular service and responsible to their superiors. They take care of the religious and pastoral care, again, regardless of affiliation, and these are kind of the different kinds of responsibilities. The religious ceremonies, advising the commander on religious accommodation, free exercise, ethical, moral issues. Working together with civilian religious faith groups, referring members to other care providers such as social workers, psychologists, medical personnel. As we look at trauma response, suicide, I work hand in hand with the behavioral health folks. That's a critical relationship. Also for my own support, I need to make sure that I have those psychiatrists, those counselors and other that I can turn to when I need help, personally. provide direct care after significant life incidents, the critical incident stress management, suicide intervention, notifications to members next of kin. I've done that. And then apply knowledge in general, military administration, chaplain branch policies. We got to be officers. We got to do all that staff stuff too. Chaplain works in all military environments, provide a ministry of presence. See, we all use those terms. Offer spiritual teaching programs. Yeah, you got things, be in unit in public parades, be with, may go abroad. You get to really get dirty too. Anybody recognize anybody in this picture?
Yes.
Who do you see?
You.
Yeah, there's me. Anybody else?
Julius Kalmar.
Julius Kalmar. He had just retired as a reserve chaplain when I went up to CFB Borden, which is, about an hour and a half or 2 hours north of Toronto, up on Lake Huron. And Pete Veer on the left, he's a Catholic chaplain, but he's not a priest. Canadian military, they can have lay pastoral associates as Catholic chaplains because to meet the needs. So he's a Byzantine Catholic, so his worship is like that of the Orthodox Church. And he gets to wear a beard too. He's currently on a ship having fun in Copenhagen. He's been posting pictures. Mike Allen was the base chaplain there at Borden, where also they have the chaplain school. So I got to meet the head of the chaplain school on that visit and learn about some of the training and so on. So, anybody interested? They've got a recruiting, and they are looking for reserve folks. And that's the only place where we've had chaplains in Canada in the military is in the reserve units. Because you have to, it's a trickier role to get endorsed for the Reg Force, and we're still working that out. We're having, because they don't have denominational endorsers for each faith group, you either have to go through the ecumenical interfaith group or the evangelical group, and we're building relationships right now. I'm working with the folks at SDACC, helping them make the connections. They're working on a memorandum of understanding, so they want Adventist chaplains. They loved Julius and thought he did great. Daniel, they love the fact that he did his PhD on PTSD and related issues. So just want to throw that little plug out this morning. So any questions about this? The food is here now. But before we break, any questions on this little commercial?
Any age limit on that?
That I don't know. That I didn't look up. The webpage would tell you. You can just Google Canadian Force or Royal Canadian Chaplain Services and you'll find it.
Do they have age cut off?
That's what he just asked.
Oh, it's just the age. Oh, I see.
Yeah. I'd have to refer you back there. For us, it's been in the 40s, but with exemption possible. So it could be extended for some faith groups, but I'm not sure what I should have looked that up, but I'll trust your Google powers.
Yeah.
The idea is to be physically fit so you can keep up and go with us, because with the soldiers or sailors, because that's one of the critical things. Where do you, as we talk about this afternoon, talking about trauma, one of the benefits that I have in a military unit is I get to know the soldiers. I get to know their families over a period of time. So when I'm delivering bad news or I'm intervening in a crisis, we already have an established relationship usually.
And there's that word from earlier, relationship.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. And one time was tough. I had to deliver notice to a young soldier from another unit that was training with us, going to deploy with us. They were from Alaska. And his 16-year-old sister had killed herself. And I had not even begun to get to know this unit. But it was one company of their battalion. Company's about 100 soldiers. Battalion is about 350, 400. And in this case, I knew their battalion chaplain back home who had the relationship with them. a Seventh-day Adventist, by the way. Kevin Miller, who's the Alaska Conference president and an Army National Guard chaplain. So I was able to reach out to Kevin, and he was able to, he was working with the family there, and he's working with the command. I'm working with the soldier and and we sent him back home on emergency leave, needless to say, but then I was able to do the follow-up. But it was one of these things where you're able to reach out to another chaplain, and those relationships that you have with other chaplains. Like here, we had some snags in the relationship, and SDACC didn't know anybody in the Canadian military, but I'd been training with Canadian chaplains since 1990, and had the relationships, had the friendships, and that was able to be a way to kind of knock in. And I keep Mark Johnson informed on my conversations, and he's appreciative of that. But that's where those relationships are so critical. And in the military, we see ourselves bouncing back and forth, reconnecting at some point with people that we had a relationship back when, or we need to work with somebody of another faith, and hey, yeah, I know that chaplain. And that helps build that network. That helps build that safety net. Because as we deal with especially suicide prevention, it's not one person who's going to make a difference there. Especially for veterans. We'll talk a little bit more about that this afternoon. We need that whole safety network in the community of churches, mental health providers, veteran agencies, and I'm part of a planning process with the City of Houston where I'm the one chaplain in it. We've got people from the different mental health agencies, from the Veterans Administration, the police department, the fire department, all looking at how do we make the city safer for veterans, thinking about suicide. How do we bring that rate down? Down to how does the police and fire interact? Where do they take them? Do they take them to the ER or to the mental hospital, or do they call in their behavioral health support? And building that kind of network in community. And so when congregations say, well, or a conference asks me, well, should I let that pastor join the reserve or the guard? That's what I say, that's the selling argument I give, is it gives you more of the connections in your community. Being a police chaplain, fire chaplain, like the Ontario Conference president has been a police chaplain for like 20 years. And we just honored him at Oakwood with a presentation in December for his service. Claudio Consuegra, who is our Director of Family Ministry for the North American Division. He's a police chaplain. He's an FBI chaplain. We have Secret Service chaplains. We have other government agency chaplains. And these are FBI chaplain is not a paid position, it's a volunteer position, as are police chaplaincies. Rich Carlson has been chaplain at Union College for 37 years, and he's been the chaplain of the Lincoln Police Department for 35 years. Sean Lee is pastor of Southview Church in Minneapolis. Also campus chaplain for University of Minnesota. Also police chaplain, and he was just doing his first training on officer-involved shootings. He had just started that when he got a phone call from his captain that there'd been a shooting by a police officer in his precinct. And the police officer who did the shooting, he knew and had already built a relationship with. This was the case where a woman thought she heard a sexual assault in the alley, called the police. She went down there in the alley to point them in the right direction, tapped on the car. He pulled his gun, shot from the passenger side through the driver's door, and killed this Australian woman. And he was found guilty a few weeks ago. But it was our Seventh-day Adventist chaplain who was there to minister to that police officer and his family in that crisis. So again, what that does is it gets you out into the community. You get to know the pulse of the community in a way that you don't as a pastor. You get to build these relationships in the community. I was getting back into the Guard when I was getting called to a new church, and I told that to the church boards. Well, they were mostly veterans on the boards. They thought it was great. But when I had a soldier who needed a place for a wedding, we had it at the church. When he couldn't afford the funeral home fees, he says, do you have a place where I could have my mom's funeral? Well, you're going to have it at the church, and we're going to take care of the food afterwards. Have a soldier who is having financial needs. Well, it's the show social ministries of the church that's going to take him in his family grocery shopping. And that's ways that my church was able to take ownership of my ministry and see that it wasn't something that I was doing freelance, but that it was an extension of their service to the community.
Circle of Hope Network, doing life and being church together.